Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today I have an interesting guest on my show, as always. David Chaumette is a very special person. He began his career working in NASA and GE aircraft engines after earning a lot of degrees in aerospace engineering from Princeton and Stanford. He then went to the University of Chicago School and had a legal career for almost 20 years. Now, I want to know first, when I gave your bio, where do you get the time to do all of that?
Well, Susan, first of all, thank you for having me on my show. I do not live the most interesting of lives, I suppose, but I have always had a real thirst for learning, and I don't often put this in my bio, but I actually double majored at Princeton, as much as Princeton lets you double major. So I completed the aerospace engineering degree and a degree in, of all things, Russian economic studies in a 4-year period. And like I said, I didn't get out much, so.
That's what it sounds like. Now, let's talk a little bit about the fact that you have actually been given a lot of attention from the Houston Chronicle, KUHF, ESPN, TMZ. All of these different stations have wanted you on because you probably have a lot of interesting stories to tell. I'd like you to tell our listeners some of the stories, because I'm sure there have been many, specifically because you've been at NASA, of all things, and certainly you as a lawyer.
Well, I'd love to. I mean, a lot of the media coverage that I've had in the past really has fallen into a couple of different categories. The most notorious was probably I was involved with a very famous football player by the name of Vince Young. He had sued his money managers, like many of the football players, unfortunately young men who don't focus on the financial aspects of their business. They get sideways, and they unfortunately lose their money. I represented one of his money managers who he had blamed for the loss of his money, and as a result, unlike other people in the press, I insisted that I spoke for my client as the lawyer. I didn't let him talk to the press. So as a result, I got interviewed by TMZ, I got interviewed by ESPN, Associated Press, the Chronicle, all of those folks. I also was very fortunate that over the years, as a business lawyer, I was sought after to give advice to people generally about how small businesses run. I'm an immigrant. I'm a son of immigrants, and we immigrants, when we come to this country, one of the things we do is we start businesses. That's what we do. And the legal system is very intimidated for those of us who are born and raised here. And so I've always viewed myself as a bit of a translator, the engineer who became a lawyer, the immigrant who became who is an active member of the American society. And so I try to help people in that regard too, by translating for them, taking the legalese out of things to help people understand and achieve their maximum potential. So
we see a lot of programs on TV about lawyers and about all these different people who are involved with the police and all these stories that they have. There must be one little story that you could tell our audience that really stood out in your mind.
Well, it's funny. There are so many little stories that come out. Vince Young is the one that really people still ask me about, because I've met Vince several times, and I live in Texas, and several years ago, Vince, in 2006, was on the University of Texas football team that won in the Rose Bowl and won the national championship. The day that he scored that touchdown, he could have been elected governor of the state of Texas 80-20 against anybody. I mean, he was that popular across the state. And I've met him several times, and he is a wonderfully nice, caring man. He really is. Right. And I think symptomatic of the problem of youth sports, he is someone who was, and coddled is a pejorative term, I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but he was coddled, he was taken care of for so long that when the sharks were surrounding him, he didn't know what to do. Right. Because he went from one bad set of folks to another bad set of folks, to a third bad set of folks. And I'm not calling anybody bad, but it's just people who had other than his best interest first. And you see a lot of that. It's part of the reason why, as you know, I've written this book, because there's so many little stories about good things that people do, and I want people to know those stories, and in part because I want people to identify it when they see it.
Of course, the book has been published yet, or is it just in the middle of coming out?
It's coming out in October. We're looking for it to come out in October.
All right.
Yes.
So, what is the title of it?
It's called Musings on Youth Baseball. Basically, it's a collection of stories that happened to me as I was a parent, coach, and league president of a youth baseball league in Houston.
Right.
Both of my sons played. I guess over the years I've coached about 20 seasons worth of baseball, and I still have a son who plays collegiate baseball, so I watch about 75 baseball games. Well, at this point of the year, I've watched about 75 baseball games in calendar year 2018.
I'm interested in knowing what the premise of the book is, but I have to tell you something. I'll share a story with you, and
Sure.
That is that my son started out with the minor leagues, and I remember very specifically, he called me and he said to me, "Mom, does it get any better than this?" And he was so delighted and happy about doing what he did. And many years pass. What happens to people in sports is that if you're not the best, very difficult, and really to make connections in baseball or football or any of the other sports, you really need somebody to bring you up the ladder.
That's absolutely true.
Today, he's with SiriusXM, and again, loving every moment of it. So I just felt like sharing that with you because I hear stories about baseball all the time. Now, let's talk about the premise of your book.
Okay. Well, I wrote the book, as I said, as a collection of stories, but it was really to humanize the baseball experience. For example, as an immigrant, like I mentioned, I wrote a chapter about meeting immigrants who are bringing their children for the ultimate of American experiences. Where I live in Houston, we have a very significant South Asian population, a very significant Asian population, and these folks did not grow up with baseball in their lives, but they see it as the quintessential American experience to go play baseball, particularly since football can be a brutal sport. They're like, we're not doing that. So they come to the field, and one of my closer friends over the years, one of my older son's teammates' fathers, the first time I talked to him at the field, it was all about what size bat to get and how to get the right bat. And they adopt. It's a way of mixing, because in today's society, there's so much what people use. I guess the word I'm hearing lately is tribalism. There's so much of we need to stick with people who are like us, no matter where you are on the political or any other spectrum. But on the baseball field, we're all equal. And the great thing about baseball was and is that even the best hitter on the team only bats 1 out of every 9 times. So if the other 8 people can't do their job, you're not going to be that successful. And that's an important lesson that I learned, particularly because as my son was doing a lot of, my older son in particular, was doing a lot of select baseball, travel baseball, we ended up on a lot of different teams. And you see a lot of different slices of people when you do that. So, I wanted to bring that story to life. I coached in a special needs league for about 4 years, which, and you really get a lot from those kids on the team. And I wanted to bring those stories to life, too.
Well, I hear you, and I think that's a wonderful way to describe how people feel about sports, particularly baseball in this case. But, the problem that I see is that everybody now is on their cell phone, and everybody is, texting everybody, and they're not doing the things that they used to do. You remember, and of course this is not my generation, but people would play on the streets, and it would be a form with a stick, and they would play stickball, and it was a community of people that were enjoying themselves. But today everything is so competitive.
No, that's very true.
You must see that.
Oh, that's absolutely true. There are two things that come to mind with your question. Once, when my older son was 12, the coach, the head coach, and I was the assistant coach that year because I was president of the league, so I couldn't be the coach. He and I had some things to talk about, so he turned to the 12-year-olds and said, "Here, organize yourself in teams and just play for a little while, have a little scrimmage." And you might as well have said, "I want all of you to grow horns in the middle of your head and start, quoting ancient Greek," because they had no idea. They didn't know how to do it. It was not part of their system. Just shocking, because that is how I grew up. I put my baseball bat across the handlebar of my 10-speed and left my house at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and I came back at 6 o'clock at night. My parents weren't there to organize the teams for me. They had no idea what that was about. The other thing that you're hitting on that is also an important point is that we are much more of something between sedentary and interior society. I heard a report on the news the other day that the average child spends 7 hours outside in a given week. 7 hours? That's ridiculous. Yes. And so the great thing, and I actually wrote the chapter. I have a chapter that's available if you go to my Facebook page and you join my mailing list. I will automatically send you the first chapter of the book. And the first chapter in the book it's called Fathers and Sons. And it's about how I had to learn about how to communicate with my children while we were on the baseball field. Because at the end of the day, we joined these sports. The men and women who go to coach these children join the sports to be closer to the children, their own children, and often that child, the last person that child wants to hear from is the parent.
Correct.
And how do you manage that? We have this myth that was perpetrated upon us when I was younger, that there was this thing called quality time. That is the biggest bunch of hooey I ever heard. It's quantity time. Even sitting there and just listening to your child.
I recall when my son was in, playing baseball when he was very little, that the parents, sure, they would get involved, but they would be they would be the ones who were competitive, and they would yell and they would scream, and they made their kids very scared.
No, you're absolutely right. I actually wrote a chapter. The second chapter in the book is about kicking out Grandpa, where I was umpiring a game, and there's a little humor in the book. When you're the president of the league, you're essentially the ultimate arbiter of all things. I mean, that you're taught that if you have any problems with anybody on the field and they're not listening to you, and you're the president of the league, you call the police. No joke. That's what you're taught. So I was umpiring a game, and someone came to yell at me because I had made their child cry. Now, I had made their child cry, and I am wrong for what happened because I was not careful in the words that I used with an 8-year-old. Okay? I'm guilty. Basically what happened is there's a rule that you can only be so close to the infield if you're playing the outfield, and I had told the child to scoot back. But when instead of using the word scoot, which exclusively means move, I used the word cheat. Don't cheat in. So the child thought I was accusing him of cheating. And I'm guilty. Look, part of life is knowing when you do something wrong. I'm raising my hand. I did it. So the kid goes into the dugout, and he starts crying. The umpire said I was cheating. Well, Grandpa loses his mind and runs out to the outfield to give me he finds his mind enough to give me a piece of it because he's going to tell me what he thinks of me. So I'm like, what happened? What did I do? Now, in part, I'm kind of mad at the coach at this point because the coach sees the child crying in the dugout and does nothing. And there's more of a story than that, but suffice it to say, he dropped the ball. But so I turned to the grandfather and I said, look, you can't yell at me. You need to stop. I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, if you keep making a disturbance, I'm going to have to kick you out. And he turns to me and says, you don't have the authority to kick me out. He doesn't know who I am. I'm the president of the league. When he says this, everyone around him who knows who I am, they all start laughing. and that sends him into outer space. I kicked him out of the ballpark, and he had to leave.
Now let's talk a little bit about college baseball and
Sure.
also Major League Baseball, because
Sure.
what's going on is very different from when, again, not in my generation, but in my parents' generation, when you had people like Babe Ruth, and
Yes.
I mean, I can name names, so many names, and they, people admired them, they idolized them. Is that still the case?
It is and it isn't, because it depends. The problem, you get unfortunately everything that can happen has a good side and a bad side. When Curt Flood won his fight in order to become a free agent, that made life a lot better for a lot of players. They weren't stuck on teams. They weren't owned as much by the owners. The problem is there's no longevity at all. And, you have people who don't stick around in the same community for long periods of time. We had two Astros retire in the last 10 years, Craig Biggio and Jeff Bagwell, who were ostensibly with the Astros for their entire careers. Other people who are more transient, who come and go, it loses their luster. And I understand the need to go and you want to win championships and you want all the glory and all this other stuff. But look, I'm not one to criticize anyone for any personal decisions they make. They make the best decisions that they can. But look at what LeBron James is doing right now. And I'm not saying that you need to be stuck in Cleveland for your entire career, but let me tell you, they would erect a whole bunch of statues in your name if you just stayed in Cleveland for the rest of your career.
Sure.
And him hopping around just gives everybody a headache at the end of the day. And it makes it harder for people to follow these people, harder for people to like them. And the money that they're talking about for several of these players is just money that people just can't even understand. I mean, the league minimum in baseball this year is right under $500,000.
Wow.
That
brings up the point, and that is you kind of have to question the fact that those athletes that you're talking about are making a fortune, and the other ones who may be not quite as good are making practically nothing. So where is this injustice? Why? I mean, I'll give you an idea of what my husband said to me once. I said, what is going on that, entertainers and sports people are getting millions upon millions of dollars? And my husband said to me, you know what? They deserve it. And I asked him, why did they deserve it more than others who were doing, who were doctors and lawyers and people like that? And his answer was, they bring in the people. Without them, baseball, football, any sport would not have a lot of people watching them. But that's what it's about. It's about people love them, like you said, and they idolize them. And they'll come and spend $50 for a seat or $100 for a seat, which leads me to one other point, and I'm interested in knowing what you think about this, and that is minor leagues. And I told you my son, did play-by-play for minor leagues. Minor leagues was such a family kind of oriented thing.
Absolutely.
There, it would be very inexpensive to bring your kids, and they would give you gifts, and there would be like all this wonderful feeling going on. It was just sweet. And today, you have to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a good seat in Major Baseball. What do you think?
Yes. Well, and actually, I'm glad you brought up the minor leagues, because my son is my son who's still playing is a rising college junior. And he spends a lot of his time during the summers playing at this, what I would call, because I'm old, a barnstorming team, where they go from city to city. I mean, it's so funny to see him playing on the, like I exchange Snapchats with him every day, and a third of them are him on the bus. I mean, crazy. He's up in New England. His team's based in New Bedford, and he's played baseball in Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and I guess in Maine. He's got a game in Maine on Saturday. But anyway, the person who he replaced, he played left field in college, and the person who he replaced was actually drafted and played for the Mets for a couple of years, or played minor league baseball for the Mets. That guy, Jeremy Wolf, has started an organization, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but I can't. But it is about the fact that many minor league baseball players go to bed hungry because the pay is so poor.
Right.
And yet, I mean, I'm not picking on anybody in the major leagues. If they would decrease their salary from $15 million to $14 million, my bet is they wouldn't notice it. I don't know. I've never made $15 million. Maybe you notice every time. I have no idea. But if they were to decrease from $15 to $14 million and give $1 million, even in the same vertical organization, just say, I'm a Cardinal, give this to the minor league players in the Cardinal organization. It changed the organization. And I will say the view that you have of minor league baseball still exists. I mean, last summer my son had an amazing experience playing for the Alaska Gold Panthers based in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I will tell you, I have encountered very few communities that I would rather watch a baseball game with.
Now, you mentioned immigrants.
Yes.
Now, again, I remember when my son played for the minor leagues, half of the team were from Latin countries.
Absolutely.
From Cuba was one of them, and I remember a whole bunch of the people who played, again, came from different countries. And they were so excited to be here in the U.S., to be playing baseball, even though, as you said before, that there was so little money in it, and yet they loved it and had a passion for it. So you talked about being an immigrant. Isn't that
Yes.
a great way for people to learn a little bit about another group of people from different countries, their customs, a way for to create sort of peace, if you will? It's all about
Absolutely.
education.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, that's one of the themes of the book, is that we don't spend enough time finding a common table to sit around. And if baseball can be that table, so be it. I had kids on my team when I coached them who were on welfare. I had kids who lived in some of the biggest houses that I've ever seen. You could play baseball inside the house.
Right.
And yet we're all equals. Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter. Part of my curse, so to speak, is my last name is Chaumette. So I would always, when you're drafting a team of 7-year-olds, you're not picking them because you think you've got like Alex Rodriguez, you're just waiting to be picked. So I would pick teams based upon the following criteria, very sophisticated. Does my son know you? Are you at the same school? Is your family willing to help? And do you have an interesting last name? So as a result, I had a Habacost on my team, a Flowers, I had Glasscock, all kinds of interesting names. And as a result, we were a real melting pot. And it was so important to those kids, because one of the things that people don't realize in this country is how much the children of immigrants translate for their immigrant parents.
That's right.
Because the kids have those feet in both worlds. They understand that, and they suffer because, look, when I deal, my family's from Haiti, and I actually listened to your interview recently with the Haitian woman who had a horrible, horrible experience. I understand that. When you talk to people who are in this country but who are descendants from other people from other countries, we live in a funny place because, like several of my Vietnamese friends, when they go home, their friends don't think they're Vietnamese. When they go back to Vietnam, people don't think they're Vietnamese. They come here and everybody says you're Vietnamese, and you go there, not so much. And so that kind of translation, it's really the only way we're going to survive as a country.
Yeah.
Because we are spending all of this time saying, okay, you belong in this box and this is who you are, but the truth of the matter is that's not the way it works. Several of my South Asian friends who have children who have grown up here, their interests, their speech patterns, their view on life are completely the same as my children, who are their grandparents and parents were born under 5 different flags, and only one of them was the United States. So, it's just it's a real mess in the way we deal with each other, but baseball and other community efforts can make a difference.
I hear you. So you talked that your book is coming out in October.
Yes.
What do you want people to take away from your book when they get up?
Well, it's funny because I view baseball as an allegory for greater things. When I've given the book, a couple of chapters to people, they realize, look, we haven't met face-to-face. I'm 5'7". I'm kind of pudgy. I have not been able to play catch with my son my older son who plays baseball now for about 8 or 9 years because he throws the ball too hard, and it moves. If you're coming to me, right? If you're coming to me to learn about baseball, I'm not going to be able to teach you how to throw a curve. It's just not going to happen. Can't hit a curve either. But what I've learned from baseball, and what I've learned and tried to get into this book is, we are one community, and there is a lot we can learn by just being better to our children in a way that they will respond to.
Yeah.
Honoring the wisdom that comes from our children, and taking the time to listen. One of the chapters I have in the book is about me in my weekly cage match with my my special needs team. There was a kid on my team who was 15. He was 6'2", maybe 250,
right.
and he's a 15-year-old boy. So he has the desires that 15-year-old boys have. I don't have any problem with that. Someone's 15, they had those desires. So when it came time to picking his, what we called angels, people who would follow him around and sort of guide him, make sure that he was safe on the baseball field. When the 2 young girls volunteered to help him, I was like, can't do that. That's not going to go in the right direction. So I ended up as his guide for the 8 seasons, and he never spoke to me the whole time. I'll make this really quick. He would pick his nose and try to stick it in my face. He would put sand and throw it at me, all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
At the end of the season, we were posing for the picture, the team picture, and I'm like, I'm going to see how, and I'm saying to myself, I'm going to see how this works because he's all over the place. So we're standing, he's wrestling around, and his little sister walks up and says, Jonathan, I've changed his name, Jonathan, hands down. And she claps her hands really loud. He stands straight like a nutcracker, like a toy soldier. And I'm like, why did you not tell me that while I've been fighting with him out in the field for the last 8 weeks?
Oh,
but the reason, but the story there is, I didn't know how to communicate with him.
That's right.
I didn't know how to talk to him in a way that he would listen. And that's true across the board. So, sorry, that story's a little long, but I wanted to make sure you got it.
I think it's a great story because, you really have to know who I call it the audience. It doesn't matter whether it's this young guy or anybody else who you deal with because, needless to say, everybody's a little different, and they need a certain way for you to deal with them. And if you get through to them, you've accomplished a lot.
Right.
And it sounds like you really have accomplished a great deal over your career, and it's just going to continue and continue, and you're sharing your book with people so that they learn about the stories. Today my guest has been David Chaumette. He is, listen to him, because he is a funny man. He's a man who has done a lot of different things, and he contributes to our society in a way that I think we need. And I'm delighted that you did the show with me today. Now, David, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to get your book, if they want to have a relationship, I'll call it, with you, what do they do?
The easiest thing to do is to go to my Facebook author page. My first book, which we really didn't talk about, which is a book about gratitude, is available on Amazon, Kindle, and in paperback. But if you go to my author page on Facebook, you can see links to all of that. Facebook.com/author David Chaumette. One word, all meshed together.
Terrific. Again, thank you very much for David Chaumette to be on the Susan Brender Show. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.